Thanks, Brad. Good afternoon, everyone. As Brad said, my topic's growth paths to meet market specs. And you can see that I've assembled an illustrious group of co-workers chosen on their intelligence, vision and rugged good looks. So I've only got a short time and I'm going to very quickly go through what are the market specs that we were targeting, because they're an endless number, of course. But the organisers asked me mainly to give an update of the growth path optimisation project, and especially new information since Darwin. So I do have to cover some of the old information that I covered in Darwin, just to give the background. But we also have an economic analysis which has recently been concluded, and I'll look a little bit at the implications and future directions. So back in the 1990s, a DPI economist called Ian Siller divided the state of Queensland up into three main zones. And I have to apologise, I don't have the same information for the other parts of Northern Australia. But these were the harsh zone in white, the endowed zone in blue, and the intermediate zone in yellow. And these were delineated based on both the seasonality of production and also the possible live weight changes on native pasture. For instance, the intermediate zone about 100 to 120 kilograms per year, and the endowed 160 kilograms plus. And our target was to hit a carcass at about 280 kilograms at 2.5 years of age, so somewhat earlier than, and that was in the intermediate zone, somewhat earlier than much of the industry is doing now. So essentially we're trying to go from something like this on low quality tropical pasture to something like this. So the growth path optimisation study, this is just one study, but I think it encapsulates a lot of the principles of grazing in this seasonally dry tropics. It was conducted in the northern speargrass at Swans Lagoon, in the intermediate zone about 100 to 120 kilograms annual growth on native pasture. So my co-workers tell me that I use too many figures, so I've decided to ignore them completely. And what I've done is, as a concession, is I've tried to make them look all the same. So we'll work on the x-axis, the horizontal axis being time over several years, and a series of dry and wet seasons. And then we're following the live weight of a group of weaners right through from about 205 kilograms, so the heaviest of the weaners, right through to slaughter at about 3.5 years of age. And this treatment is what we call the low nil. In each case, the hyphen divides the treatments in the first two dry seasons post-weaning. So we have low treatment in the first year, this first dry season, which was just a commercial salt, urea, sulphur type lick, commonly fed. And then those steers receive no further supplementation thereafter. So very similar to what a lot of the industry would do with their growing steers. And that's typical of some of the weaners at the end of the dry season. At the other extreme, we've got the high treatment, so high plane of nutrition in both the first and second dry seasons post-weaning. And they were slaughtered about 12 months earlier. And the supplement we used there was a MUP type supplement, molasses, urea, protein meal. We used copper meal in this case, not so important. And then salt, a little bit of phosphorus and some rumensin. And that was fed at either ad lib or near ad lib throughout in each of the two dry seasons. Now there was an intermediate treatment. This treatment, the low-high treatment, they followed the low plane of nutrition in the first dry season post-weaning, and then in the second year they were on the high plane MUP type supplement, so intermediate between the other two. Also slaughtered about 2.5 years of age, and also received that high intake MUP type supplement. And we deviated a little bit from the supplement nexus by using a Leukina treatment, which I've called low Luke. So they got the low treatment early on, the commercial salt lick, And then in the second year, we put them on a truck at the end of the growing season. and trucked them down to Bryan pastures, and they grazed a Lakina grass pasture for the next 8 months. And during that time, they did a very respectable 0.8 of a kilogram a day. So they were really steaming along quite nicely. And they were slaughtered at just over 2 years of age. Some of the steers not long before they went to slaughter. Superimposed across all these treatments, we had a plus and minus Hgp treatment. Hgps are obviously an important part of the system in Northern Australia. And those Hgps were implanted in half the steers right through from weaning till eventual slaughter. And I'll talk about the results of that soon. We ran this over 2 drafts. The first draft, you can see here the results I've shown. I'll just say that the colours stay the same all the way through, so I hope you've been paying attention to what I'm telling you. Sorry, Alan. And you can see that this first year was a fairly mild dry season. Even the steers on just the urea supplement was still gaining weight. By contrast, we hit a fairly harsh second dry season. Steers were losing weight. We opened up a very big advantage to the high plain nutrition treatments, 107 kilograms. So those guys really did fall behind during that period. The other thing to point out here is that this blue group, the group that were only fed in the second year, actually they virtually caught up to the group that was fed in both years. And it sort of indicated that we could delay feeding until later in the production cycle and still get to the same point. And here we did it with $60 less supplementation cost. And if we'd left it at that, we would have had a nice little story. But we made the mistake of going into a second draft. And this is draft 2, exactly the same treatments, same colours and everything. Except in this case, this was 12 months delayed. So the 2009 dry season happened in this first post-weaning phase, and those steers lost weight initially. We had a little bit of rain in November, but they were on a negative plane of nutrition. By contrast, we got to the second dry season, and it was very mild. We had rain in August, more rain in September. Rain has ruined more good experiments, and I know you producers feel the same way about it, but it just stuffs up good nutritional experiments. But anyway, the thing that you'll notice is that the blue group didn't catch up because we weren't able to feed enough supplement. And the irony is that the years where you can really do something nutritionally are those really dry years. So this was a harsh, mild combination. And if you're going through to 2.5 years slaughter at least, you've got to go through 2 dry seasons, 2 wet seasons at least. And you don't know what combination of these seasons you're going to get. You could get 2 harsh in a row, 2 mild, or a combination as we did. And that has an enormous impact on the results that you end up with. And there's a good case for delaying feeding till right out at the end here to see what sort of where your cattle are at that point. So there is a risk in delaying feeding that you may not hit the target. There's also a risk, obviously, in starting too early, in that you don't know what seasons are ahead, what the currency is going to be like, what the market is going to be like. So just talk briefly about another really important component of our grazing system, and that's the compensatory growth and the effect it has on the conversion of supplements. So here you can see that we got compensatory growth at the end of the feeding period. We had 47 kilograms, reduced back to 29 at the end of the following wet season, 107 kilograms at the end of that dry, back to 74. And overall, across all the feeding trials we did, it was about 30%, but as high as 50%. So it markedly reduces the response to supplementation. We fed cattle as weaners and as yearlings. And the conversion rate wasn't all that different. It was about 9 to 12, and that's kilograms of MUP per kilogram of additional gain. However, that was measured when we looked at the live weight changes at the end of the dry season. If we take them through to the end of the wet season, you can see that those conversion rates blow out to about 17 to 20. And when you're multiplying by about 22 cents a kilogram, you can see that the cost of converting supplement into additional gain is very high. Let's just talk about the other component of the diet. Of course, we talk about the cost of supplements, but there's the pasture component as well, and it's a very important part of it, especially when you're looking at reducing the age at slaughter. So here we didn't have a way of measuring pasture intake, so we made an estimate, and we used a spreadsheet model we'd developed called Quick Intake, which is based on the Australian feeding standards. And all we're really doing is back calculating from a measured live weight gain back to an intake, and we need an estimate of the diet quality, which we had through fecal NIRS every fortnight. We had dry matter digestibility. So here, this shows some of those live weight curves once again, 3 of the main treatments. And the red boxes here indicate the amount of supplement in tonnes per head fed to each steer. We now have an estimate, excuse me, of the pasture intake as well. What you can see is that by reducing the post-weaning phase from 3 years back to 2, say by a third, we more than halved the pasture intake of those steers, partly through that reduced time on grazing, but also through some substitution effect. So that's actually obviously got to be factored into any economic analysis. The other thing, of course, the major tool we have is Hgps, and it's been talked about a little bit this morning already. Hgps are still one of the most cost-effective treatments that we can apply to improve profitability. So here, the same live weight curve once again. This time I've separated out the effects of no Hgp, which are the open symbols for each colour, and plus Hgp, which are the closed symbols. 3 treatments, the low, nil, high, and the Leukina treatment. And the implants started with Computose 400, Computose 100. We then gave Computose G, the Trenbolone derivative, just before slaughter, except for the Leukina steers, which were all ready to go to slaughter, so they didn't get that treatment. And then with the steers that were carried on, we gave another Computose 400. And the figures here indicate the percentage increase in growth over that period, right from weaning through to eventual slaughter. So you can see we had about 15% with the Leukina, the steers that were growing at the fastest rate, only 6% there with the high plane treatment. It was about 11% for these low plane steers at that point. But you can see that reduced in the 3rd year out to 4%. And we noticed this not just in 1 year, but in both drafts, that response we had to the Hgps, even though we continued the implantation, was actually reduced. And I'm going to come back and give a possible reason for that in a minute. Just looking at the effect of the Hgp on carcass attributes, and I've now got the second draft results here. So I've combined the 3 treatments here, the higher plane treatments. I've put them together, and they were killed at around 30 months of age. Separated them out from the ones that were slaughtered 12 months later, 42 months. And within that, I've just separated out a no Hgp and plus Hgp in each case. So I'll just walk you through this very quickly. Hgp effect, extra 19 to 26 kilograms of carcass. Now, we killed all these at the one time. Troy was talking this morning about killing earlier, the Hgp steers. All ours were killed at the same stage. In terms of the ossification, with these younger killed animals, extra 25% ossification score. With the later killed, we almost double the ossification score. So it has a major impact, especially when you're looking at getting into those MSA markets. In terms of the MSA, Hgps increased the boning group, and I apologise for using old technology. My follow-up will talk in the new technology. But this was what we got back from the abattoirs. So an extra 2.8 to 4.4 boning group higher, and of course we're looking for low boning group, 10 or less to get, which is what we were paid a premium on. And you'll notice that only one of the steers that had HGPs actually got into that 10 or less category. But despite that, the HGPs were worth an extra $61 to $76 over the hooks. And you'll see that the price wasn't really different because we pushed those steers with the HGP up into the next part of the grid. The other aspect we were really interested in was skeletal growth, and the reason we're interested in this is that the skeleton forms the framework upon which the muscles build. So if you build a skeleton, the muscles will follow. So we're interested in just how this changed over the life of these animals. So here, Bernie, more graphs. Down the bottom, same live weight curve you've seen before, just two of the treatments, the low plane treatment in black and the high plane treatment in red. Up the top, I've got the height at the hip. So this was our index of skeletal growth. You can see with the high plane treatments where there's really no setback in their live weight performance throughout, that they had this nice curvilinear effect on growth, which is what we expect, the conventional expectation, until they plateaued out when they were reaching their mature skeletal size. If we look at these lower plane groups, you can see that when they were losing weight here in the dry season, they were still gaining in height. So they're still on an upward plane. So that was really interesting. So we teased out the Hgp effect with those two groups. And what this shows is that, once again, these are the steers with Hgp, these were without. So the steers without Hgp at slaughter were actually about 45 millimetres taller than those with HGPs. So what we think has happened, and it's supported by the literature, is that the HGPs are hastening the closure of the growth plate on the long bones, meaning they're reaching their skeletal or their maximum frame size at an earlier age. And this may be the reason that we were getting that extra growth on the non-implanted steers in that third year. So the bottom line, the economics, I'm getting towards the end. So Fred Chudley did the economics, and he looked at it in two different ways. It wasn't that we were trying to get the answer that we were looking for, but we looked at the steer net value added, which is just the final value of the steers minus the costs, direct and indirect. And the other one was to look at a herd model comparison using the breed cow dynamo. And we looked at a base herd of 1,000 breeders in the intermediate zone, with steers turned off at about 42 or 3.5 years of age, the low nil treatment, the black line that I showed before. And then while maintaining constant grazing pressure, we looked at what effect all those growth paths that we tested would have on the herd, both on the property, the herd and the profitability, and compared them in terms of the gross margins. This curve shows the gross margins, looking at the various treatments here. The solid boxes are the steers without HGP, and the shaded ones plus HGP. You can see that sometimes we got a slightly negative effect of the HGP with this draft, sometimes not. Big effect, Lakina gave us an increase in the gross margins and a big boost with the HGP there. I should say that also includes a $75 to truck them from Swans to Bryan pastures. You'd probably be looking at doing that somewhat closer. The other thing you notice is that the more supplement we fed, the bigger the effect on negative effect on the gross margins. Second draft, similar sorts of responses, even bigger effect to the Lakina, and in every time we got a positive effect of the HGP. We didn't get much depression there in the gross margin because, as I said, we weren't able to feed much. So what can be done? I think it's just a mathematical decision that you've got to come up with. If we go back to this curve with the zones and we estimate or assume that we're going to get about 100 kilograms per year in the intermediate, 160 kilograms in the endowed, and we're looking at a target of 550 kilograms at 2.5 years of age. And if you look at the weaner live weight, and looking at light weaners at 125 kilograms versus the heavier ones at 200, then these figures are the extra annual live weight gain you've got to pick up somewhere to get to that target. So in the endowed zone, an extra 15 to 53 kilograms. If we go to the intermediate zone, then it's 75 to 123. We did that with the GPO project. The 123 seems like a bridge too far, and the economics of it obviously are very doubtful. Just quickly, I've got 1 minute, just to show in the endowed zone things can be a little bit different. This is work that Bernie and Joe were doing up on the tablelands. They end up often with steers at about 540 kilograms unfinished, going into a dry frosted winter. Two options: they can either sell them unfinished, maybe pick up something like $2.80 a kilogram, or they can feed them a high MUP type supplement for 100 days, sell them in September, out of season, and pick up a premium. And the profit really depends on the differential between this price and this price here. That's some of the steers being fed. So take-homes, feeding high-energy supplements is expensive and really needs careful consideration and planning, especially in some of the lower productivity zones. Target suitable cattle with a high likelihood of reaching the target within break-even cost limits. Fattening cattle in the endowed areas on improved pastures does produce high-quality beef and can do it profitably. HGPs are a cost-effective option if EU, MSA, and I'd include the certified pasture fed there, because if you've got to get to MSA to get into certified pasture fed, then obviously HGPs are going to be a problem, or if the premiums are low. And finally, nutrition will continue to play a part in improving access to higher quality, higher value markets, but nutrition at the right price. Thank you.